Hi, everyone. Um, Before we start talking about piping plovers, I'm going to talk a little bit about um, the Erie Bird Observatory and our history, and then I'll talk a little bit about birding at Presque Isle. I'm really glad that I could get those brochures to you because that is a great resource. And then after that, we'll get into um, the amazing but bittersweet season at Gull Point. The first thing about EBO, we were founded in 2018. We and myself and two other coworkers started the organization because the work that we were doing under the auspices of Audubon, Pennsylvania, came to an end because they closed the Northwest Pennsylvania office. And we wanted to continue the work that we were doing, obviously. Our mission is to foster enthusiasm for birds and conservation through ornithological research and public engagement. We conduct bird banding for forest birds in the spring and the fall. And we are carrying on the tradition of bird banding that has been taking place at Presque Isle since 1960. Concentrates on migrating songbirds, and we have a banding station that's open to the public. It's typically Friday, Saturday, and Sunday that it's open. We do have social media accounts where you can check for current updates, because weather, of course, decides whether we can band or not. We also conduct education and outreach like bird walks, kayak birding excursions, and presentations like this one. We also conduct marsh bird monitoring, primarily because least and American bitterns are state endangered. We also share our information with Presque Isle State Park because it helps them evaluate their work that they are doing to mitigate invasive plant species like Phragmite and narrowleaf cattail. We also work with utility companies to relocate osprey nesting platforms off of utility poles and features, and onto dedicated osprey nesting platforms. And we also have just recently started Bird Safe Erie. We do that in the spring and the fall and during the migration season, primarily in downtown Erie, that is adjacent to Presque Isle Bay. We had, it's a very new program. Spring was our first season, fall was our second season, and we're refining the areas that we monitor and the work that we do, and we're starting to gather the information that we need to share them with building owners that we might possibly be able to change something to prevent bird strikes. And burning at Presque Isle. Some of you may be familiar with Presque Isle and where it sits. But we are, excuse me. But that is Presque Isle State Park. It's a recurve sandspit that sits out into Lake Erie. Presque Isle Bay is in the center. And it is probably one of the best places to bird in the state, especially in the Northwest. There's really a 4-season birding opportunities based on the different habitats and areas like the lake and the bay, and then the different forest structures within the park. Okay. songbirds typically are found on the interior trails. I've kind of tried to highlight them in kind of a soft yellow there. Places like Pine Tree Trail, Dead Pond Trail, the Sidewalk Trail, and down in Fry's Landing, which is where the bird banding takes place. There are also opportunities along the neck, the narrow neck of the peninsula, and for songbirds, and also for wading and interior birds. And I'm sorry, the Zoom keeps wanting to put up a bar in front of me, and I'm having trouble seeing the map. Wading birds and marsh birds are also can be found in the interior lagoons along the Marina Lake, in some of the Ridge Pond, along the Sidewalk Trail, in Niagara Pond, which is especially good. That's also good for it's also good for waders, or excuse me, for ducks, but I'll get to that in a second. Leo's Landing is also a great place for passerines and waders, and the head of the bay along the very beginning of the Presque Isle Park is also good for waders. And actually, prothonotary warblers have started nesting there again, which is pretty exciting for us because we had been missing our prothonotary prothonotaries for a number of years. During the winter, as long as the bay stays open, diving ducks can be seen along the lake and in the larger bays like Presque Isle Bay, Misery Bay, Thompson's Bay. Presque Isle Bay is the large one in the middle. Thompson's Bay is the smaller bay here and in this area, and then Misery Bay in here. Dabbling ducks tend to occupy the smaller bays and ponds and in the lagoon system. And you can see the kayak icons on here. These are all great kayaking opportunities, and it's a great way to see some of the birds if you are so inclined. Of course, in the winter, Presque Isle Bay is known for a nice variety of winter gulls. We have little gulls. We have, of course, Bonaparte gulls. We've had a slatyback gull one winter, and every now and then a black-headed gull shows up. So it's always a nice variety of gulls in the winter. And of course, you know how nice and mild our winters are in Erie. So I know that you won't hesitate to come up and do some gulling at Presque Isle. That was a joke. Of course, if you are looking for shorebirds, they're a great place to see. Gull Point is your primary location for shorebirds. They can sometimes be seen along some of the beaches in here, in particularly during the fall migration. Sometimes along Beach 11, they can be seen. And of course, things like spotted sandpipers and solitary sandpipers and killdeer can be seen just about anywhere on the park that has that's adjacent to water. But now we can get into specific shorebirds. Of course, one of the other programs of Presque Isle, or excuse me, of Erie Bird Observatory is monitoring piping plovers and common terns. Great Lakes piping plovers are federally endangered. Common terns are state endangered. We're not going to be talking much about common terns this program because we didn't have any nesting common terns at Gull Point this year. We did last year, and we actually made a big leap. We actually had a pair nest and actually hatched chicks, which was the first time since really like probably the 50s or the 60s that we actually reached hatch. Unfortunately, we didn't. The chicks did not survive. They were probably predated. So the 2023 season was all about piping plovers, and boy, was it a season. Erie Bird Observatory works with a variety of different organizations to work on the piping plover common tern recovery team. We work with the Pennsylvania Game Commission, who has jurisdiction over the birds, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, who oversees endangered species nationally, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, which has jurisdiction over the park, our Army Corps of Engineers, who does the sand replenishment at Gull Point, not at Gull Point, at the park, and also consults. And because of the sand replenishment is the reason that the contract exists, because you technically have to do pre-activity monitoring before sand replenishment can take place. We also work with the Natural Heritage Program of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. They lead the plant management at Gull Point in collaboration with DCNR. There is a lot of plant management that occurs at Gull Point. And then, of course, there's Erie Bird Observatory. That's us. And this is what we do, is we're pretty much the boots on the ground. We're there 6 days a week from April until August, or when piping plover chicks leave. Our goal is, or our mission is to do the daily monitoring, send reports to the rest of the team, keep all the data for things that occur. Of course, we also monitor, we also count all the other shorebirds that are occurring at Gull Point. When it comes to piping plovers, there's approximately 8,000 piping plovers in the world, and all of them occur in North America. There's 3 separate populations, and I'm doing this because a lot of you probably already know this, but I just wanted to touch base with the other 2 populations. The Atlantic population, of course, along the Atlantic Ocean, and the Great Plains population in the middle of the continent are both threatened as a subspecies, and the Great Lakes population is endangered. When the population was at its most robust, the Great Lakes population had nesting sites on all of the Great Lakes in all of the United States, or the states in the United States that border the Great Lakes, and also Ontario on the Canadian side, and including Pennsylvania. Presque Isle State Park was the only nesting site for Great Lakes piping plovers historically. And before we move forward, I'm going to talk about the little timeline of the Great Lakes piping plover pairs. When the species was listed, there was approximately 14 to 17 pairs in the wild, and in 1988, as part of their recovery effort, the people in Michigan, which is where the population was centered, started using exclosures, and I will talk about exclosures and how they work in a little bit, in 1988, and that was here. And then in 1993, which is right in here, they started using captive rearing technique, which I will explain in a little bit. And it was the combination of those 2 things. My mouse is a little haunted. Anyways, that is when we started seeing gains in the population. You can see this graph goes through 2020. You can see that we've had really bad years in one way, shape, or form, and that's usually to marginalize habitat for one reason or another. 2018 and 2020, those were high water years across the Great Lakes, and that was that reduced the number of pairs and the number of nests in general. I want to talk about the banding system. Many of you might know the Great Lakes population has a lot of band combinations that are used. They wear a lot of bling. And this is an example of an adult band. There are also chick bands that are created, and I'm trying not to make this too complicated, but I just wanted to let you know if you're out in the field and you see these things. This is how it is expressed. This is the X band on the top right hand corner, and this is the orange flag, and that orange flag indicates that it is a Great Lakes piping plover, and no other piping plover from the Atlantic or the Great Plains population would have that flag. The silver band is metal band, and it indicates that is the band that every piping plover that's banded gets, and it stays with them for the rest of his or her life. And then the other bands that a bird may have, like this orange band or these black, blue and yellow bands, are a unique combination to that specific bird. And that's what they are. That's what we use to identify individuals in the population. Because the species is so limited, it is important to be able to identify individuals and where they go, what they do. And it's one of the reasons I'm down here is because I'm seeing some of the birds that actually summer at Presque Isle and nest there, and they come down here for the winter. And I'm actually down here to see some of those birds. Chick bands have a very different banding combination. They're all banded as a brood. There's typically 3 or 4 chicks in a brood, and they get the same band combinations. They get the silver band, just like any bird that gets banded. It's a federal band. And then they get Great Lakes broods get an orange band, and you can see it has like a yellow dot on it. So for example, in a brood of 4 chicks, when they're banded as chicks, they would get the orange band. One would have a yellow dot, one would have a red dot, one would have a blue dot, one would have a green dot. And then the other combinations actually identify the nesting location. This is one of our Presque Isle's combinations. And you can see on the black band on its lower left leg that it has a number on it. So it will have a unique number that you can see that can help you identify an individual bird. And the reason for that is because if we have a brood that is that was banded in 2023, they will get the same combination with the yellow, red, blue, or green dot, and they'll still get 2 black bands on their lower legs, but the number will identify them to a specific year. And so in 2024, if another brood gets this same combination, they'll look just like this, except the number will be different. And those numbers are very difficult to read in the field, so we do our best. I kind of reviewed this a little bit when I talked about Presque Isle Bay. I usually include this because if people have never been to Erie or Presque Isle, I just wanted to give you the lay of the land here. The city of Erie and the township of Mill Creek is down below. The park consists of this recurve sand spit that sits out into Lake Erie. The historical designated critical habitat for piping plovers goes from approximately here, which is the beach lighthouse, out to and including Gull Point. This is the area that we are required to monitor. And we typically monitor that 6 days a week. And after the end of June, if no birds have nested in that area, we can skip the lighthouse to beach 10 portion of the monitoring and concentrate our efforts on the birds that are nesting at Gull Point. Gull Point itself is a very dynamic environment. It is affected by the currents, which are primarily from the west, and of course by weather, because it sits out in the middle of the lake in the Thompson's Bay and receives a lot of wind from all directions. So it's particularly windy place. Lots of things can move the sand around, and the profile of the Presque Isle of Gull Point changes on a regular basis from year to year, and sometimes from week to week or day to day. Here is Gull Point, an aerial view from 2018. Here is 2019, and you can see that we've lost a bunch over here on the east, and have gained a lot here on the south, and that is actually continuing. That is 2021, and this is 2023. And you can see that the lower southern tip is growing dramatically, but we're losing a lot in here and a little bit up on the north side. This is all excellent nesting habitat for piping plovers, and we're hoping that it increases, but also grows up here as well. But that is usually determined by whether we have ice on the lake in the winter, and it doesn't. If we have winter storms, when there's no ice to protect the shoreline, we can get a lot of erosion and a lot of damage, especially up on the north side. This is the observation platform at Gull Point. I call this my office. This is where I spend a lot of time during the season from April to August or September. That looks out over the bay looks out over the sand plains, and it's actually, the southern tip has gotten so far away that they've put in a secondary platform that will be open to the public, unless a common tern or a piping plover decides to nest nearby it. Then it will be closed to the public. But this area is a natural area. It is designated that by the park, and you can see that there are this rope right here leading up to the support of the platform. There is a closed area that the public cannot go in, but there is a roped trail that leads to the platform for the public to use. So if you are visiting Gull Point between April 1st and October 31st, the area outside the platform and the rope trail is closed to the public. After October 31st, the whole area is open to the public. Great opportunity to see snowy owls in the winter. Our season started this year on April 15th, as it always does. And 2 birds were there when I first arrived. And they were our two of our breeders from last year, Jerry and Eve. And those are their band combinations that we use. I'm just including them for completeness sake. They bred last year. They produced 4 chicks. We fledged 3 of them. This bird, Jerry, is a bird. He was our pioneer bird. He arrived in 2016, and unlike other migrant plovers, he decided to stay at Gull Point, even though he never found a mate. But he spent most of the summer there, and which was a very hopeful sign that he really liked the habitat, and he wanted to stay there. And sure enough, he showed back up in 2017, and a female did arrive, and they were the first nest on Gull Point since the middle of the 1950s. So that was more than 60 years. We were very happy to see these two birds show up on April 15th, because that was a promising sign that we would have some seasoned nesters at the point. They quickly got down to work and produced a nest with 4 eggs. And the nest on the left is when I first found the nest, it already had 3 eggs in it. The nest on the right, which has a little exclosure over the top, they had that it includes the 4th egg, which makes it a complete clutch. And we were on our way. I wanted to talk about a little bit about exclosures. You can see the exclosure netting or fencing that is used, and that is about 4 by 4 feet in size. The holes are big enough for piping plovers to come in and out, but so that's why it's an exclosure as opposed to an enclosure. And it keeps ground predators and aerial predators out because they can't fit through the holes. The white lattice work on the ground that you see there is going to be buried under the sand. It's not seen. And I'll show you one that has been installed. And that's a typical installation. The exclosure sits over the nest. The fencing, that white lattice work that you saw, is actually under the sand, and that prevents mammals from digging up under the edge of the exclosure. And the Game Commission uses a camera, motion sensitive camera. It's primarily for looking if the nest is predated for one reason or another, they can identify the predator. Of course, it's also used for checking in on the nest, seeing if everybody's incubating, if there's eggs and they're incubating, and just kind of general checks for when we are not there, because we can't be there on a regular basis. Soon after, the bird on the left and the bird on the right showed up, and the bird on the left is Ollie, who is one of Jerry's sons, and Lola, who got the nickname Lola from her bands, which are LOL, and they found each other compatible, and they created a nest. And once we finally got a good look at Lola's bands, we realized that Lola was Ollie's mom. So that was kind of a shock, and we were sort of surprised, but nonetheless, they went ahead and nested, and they produced a nest with only 2 eggs. We didn't know if their 2 eggs were because it was a mom and a son, or if there was some other reason, but for some reason they only produced 2 eggs. And that was, they stopped laying eggs. We don't know. We never found a rogue egg anywhere else. Sometimes females will lay not in their nests, but we exclosed it like we do all the others, and they incubated and they hatched and produced 2 healthy chicks on June 20th. And by June 26th, they were banded as chicks on June 26th, and they are considered fledged, and that's kind of a statistical fledge on July 13th, and that's it's when they're 23 days old, that is when they're considered fledged. They might not even be flying yet, or they could be just starting to. Um, Unfortunately, so we have one successful hatch on the on Gull Point, but nest one with Jerry and Eve was in trouble because Jerry, our old pioneer, went missing, and Eve attempted to incubate, but no plover can incubate alone because both adults share incubation duties, and if one goes missing, the other one cannot do it alone and will often abandon the nest. And the protocols of the conservation plan says that you salvage the eggs. They go into incubation immediately, where they're transported to the Detroit Zoo, who has special incubation facilities for them, and they are cared for until hatch. And after they hatch and mature for a few days, they go to a captive rearing facility in northern Michigan, where they continue their development, and they're eventually released back into the wild. And here's a couple of chicks in the captive rearing facility. They get warmth, they get light, they get food available to them. Of course, piping plovers and many other shorebirds are precocial, which means that they get up and feed themselves within an hour of their hatch. So they have to provide food in kind of the same way. I don't know exactly how captive rearing does that, but they also get a feather duster, and you probably wonder why they get a feather duster in their facility. And that is because the feather duster approximates brooding. Chicks can't regulate their body heat until they're about 10 days old. And so they usually rely on a parent to keep them warm and also provide probably a sense of security and safety. And so these chicks are given the feather duster so that if they feel that way, they can actually climb under the feather duster and get a sense of brooding. That probably also helps when they become parents. They kind of understand more about brooding. Eve did not mourn for very long. She took up with another plover that showed up, another male, and she got busy making a nest with Jerry's grandson, who does not have a nickname, but you can see he is a Presque Isle bird based on the combination of bands on his leg. And he is actually Jerry's grandson and Ollie's son. And he takes up with Eve, who is not his mother and or grandmother. And they have we have our third nest. And those unfortunately, I'm using this word a lot this season, unfortunately. Eve goes missing as well. And so Jerry's grandson tries to incubate those eggs and isn't able to, for the same reason Eve could not incubate. And so that nest of clutch of 4 eggs is also salvaged, go to incubation, and goes to captive rearing. So we are left with still one nest on the beach and two nests that the eggs have been removed and gone to captive rearing. And one of the reasons for the 2 adults missing, we assume, are predators. And the 2 aerial predators that were primarily suspect were falcons and gulls, which usually feed on the eggs and the chicks. But we also wanted to try to control the gull population as well, because they were harassing one of our nests that the first time Nestor, Jerry's grandson, didn't choose a very good spot because the males choose the territory. And it was right near where a lot of gulls loafed. And so the gulls got interested in what was going on there and started pecking at the exclosure. Of course, falcons, like peregrines and merlin, also frequent the point. And you can see here one perched on some driftwood right near an exclosure, and thank goodness that was not an active nest at the time. So that would have been a very scary. But because these two adults went missing, we realized we may have a bigger predator problem than we've ever had in the past. And we started to create some predator mitigation practices. And one of them was reducing potential perches. So any tall pieces of driftwood were cut down or sawed off or broken off or whatever we could do. And that was part of what we did during our monitoring period. Sometimes we took extra time besides monitoring to do it. We also deployed a variety of deterrents. We actually relocated dead gulls into areas where the gulls were congregating, where we didn't want them to. The dead gulls tend to chase off loafing gulls. The gulls don't like to hang around a dead gull. We also used some fake gull effigies for that purpose as well. They looked dead, like a dead gull, and the gulls didn't want to hang out there. We used some fox decoys, just flat. You could move the tail around, and all of these were moved on a regular basis as often as we could without disturbing the plovers. We also gulls are attracted to dead fish as a food source. So wherever there were dead fish where we didn't want gulls to be, we buried the fish, and that kept. We were thinking that the fish, by getting rid of the fish, the gulls wouldn't be attracted to being there. We also deployed a scarecrow, which was pretty darn funny. It was built by a Pennsylvania Game Commission biologist, and was taken out to Gull Point, and he got named Scary Larry because it came from Scarus Laris. So instead of a scarecrow, it was a scare gull. And Laris, of course, is the name of the gull genus. You can see here on the right, when he first got deployed, he was kind of bright and shiny. And this is him later, kind of slumped in his chair with a different pair of polyester pants that we found out there and just happened to fit him. And he's all faded. And we had a lot of fun with Scary Larry, as far as taking a lot of fun pictures. And Scary Larry kind of deteriorated and had some really off days. And sometimes he actually fell apart. And we had to reassemble him and get him back into get him back to work. We would always kid that Larry was on another bender last night and he's not himself, so we had to rebuild him. We also brought in APHIS, Wildlife Services, to attempt to capture a specific young peregrine falcon that was hanging around a bit too often. They used a couple of different traps. On the left is a Swedish goshawk trap. On the right is a pole trap. They perched on it, and it was spring loaded, and they could capture the bird safely. They were planning on relocating the bird if they captured it, but unfortunately, the 3 times that they were out there, it did not. They were not able to capture the young peregrine falcon, and we will be continuing a discussion with them for next year. We've already met virtually to talk about different predator mitigation techniques and problems, and all sorts of various techniques. So we're going to hope to improve our predator mitigation next year. So as to touch base, we have two nests that have gone, the eggs have gone off to captive rearing. We have one nest where we have the chicks are hatched and running around, and dad is still with them. Moms tend to leave sooner. But we also have, now that Eve is gone, we have Jerry's grandson who is running around unaccompanied by a female. And we also have this other bird who is unbanded. And we actually thought that when this bird arrived, it was a female, and based on its plumage, because it's band, it was very lightly banded, and it didn't appear to it appeared to have more female characteristics than male characteristics. But then he started courting Eve after Jerry died, and we figured out he was a male. So we had these two males running around without mates, and kind of twiddling their toes. But then on June 10th, this gal showed up, and we named the unbanded bird UB, for UB, unbanded bird. And we had this new female that showed up, and we called her the widow from New York, because she had a nest in Sandy Lake State Park in New York on Lake Ontario. She lost her mate. Those eggs were salvaged, and then she left, came to Presque Isle, and they found each other, and suddenly we have a fourth nest, which was kind of surprising because it was a little late in the season for them to start up. And they unfortunately picked a very low spot, a very bad nesting location in the low spot in one of the outer ponds, and the ground was actually almost always wet. That's how low it was. So any substantial rain or wind event that pushed a lot of water into one of those ponds, because it is attached to the bay, would cause a problem. And it did. The water came up. The eggs were salvaged, but kept in local incubation. And then a team from EBO, the Game Commission, and Fish and Wildlife accomplished a nest raising. And you can see that this is kind of a stock photo. This was when we were practicing before we went in and actually did the raising. There are fake eggs in the nest at this point. So when we raised the nest, we essentially put a little ring around the nest, and then went underneath it with a flat shovel, and we set it aside, and then we raised the nest. And you can see here that we raised it about 6-7 inches higher than where it had been. And we were hoping that that would be enough to carry it to hatch. The real eggs were put back in, and the raised nest, however, was not high enough. And we had what's called a sesh, where water moves from one end of the lake to the other end of the lake and raises the water level dramatically. Lake Erie is shallow, and Erie is on one of the shallowest. There's 3 basins within Lake Erie, and Erie is on the shallowest of those basins. So when water comes up, it's like water splashing in a bathtub. The water comes up high and fast. And here's me trying to actually what I was we were attempting to salvage the eggs from the nest, but when we got there, the eggs were already gone. And I tried to put the fake eggs on the scrape, but I couldn't, because they started floating away. And then I realized, if I'm going to find the real eggs, I'm going to have to see which way they floated. and the fake eggs were floating towards me. And so I realized, they're probably behind me because they had already floated away. And so I collected up the fake eggs, stuck them in my pocket. We turned around. That's my one of the park intern is with me that day. And we turn around and go about 5-6 feet away and start, we just start looking slowly. Thank goodness they float. And we finally found all four, scooped them up, put them in the container, took them back to the platform. The game commission showed up with a portable incubator and took them once again to local incubation. It was a very dramatic day, and it was a very tiring day. And unfortunately, it was kind of a cold day. We did our best to keep the eggs warm. We kind of left them, we kept them up against our legs because that was the best way to at least provide a little bit of heat. Then with the fake eggs back, they did put fake eggs back in the nest when the water receded, and this plover couple took right to that scrape and started incubating again. But the team realized that we needed more than just this raised nest, and the decision was made to actually move the nest from where it was to a safer location above the water line. And we utilize the same basic message. Those are the fake eggs that are in the nest. We put a different kind of ring over it, which we made from a gardening pot saucer, plastic saucer, and cut out the bottom of it. And then we slid the a flat, that's actually my flat pizza peel from home. We slid it under the nest and moved it. And that was the technique we used. We moved it over the course of 7 moves, from the old nest location to the new nest location. You can see that's above the water line on drier ground, but we had to do it in increments. And then every time we moved it, we had to make sure that the plovers came back and accepted the nest where it was. They could find it, they would go back and start incubating on it. We moved it 25 meters, which is about 82 feet. And this is a protocol that was developed in the Canadian Great Plains for the Great Plains population, because they have a lot of reservoir nesting birds, and the reservoirs can change based on how they control the water in the reservoirs. It was the Saskatchewan Water Security Agency that created the protocol in 2013. It was the first time that this method was used in the United States for any population. So it was kind of brand new to us, and it was a 10 to 12 hour day, because it took us a long time to safely move the nest. It was kind of exciting and made for it was a learning experience for all of us, and incredibly hands-on in terms of being with an endangered species and actually moving its nest. Because it took so long, we left the real eggs in the nest that night, and the next morning the real eggs were returned to the nest. And believe it or not, that evening the eggs started hatching, which was kind of amazing because we got them back to the parents just in time for hatch to begin, which was a close call. They hatched over a 3-day period. 2 hatched the evening that the eggs were returned. 1 hatched the next day, and we had a 4th egg that still had not hatched. And by that third day, we were like, well, maybe this egg isn't viable. These poor eggs have been through quite a bit. So I went out, and what I was going out to do was to listen to the egg to see if I hear movement. And if I didn't hear movement, I was going to salvage the egg, and it was going to either go, it was going to get, we were going to check for viability, and then if it would go to research if it wasn't viable. But I got out there and I looked at the egg, because the parent immediately gets off and starts yelling at you when you get off the egg. And we wanted the parents to start caring for the chicks, but they would stay with the egg if they still thought it was going to hatch. And I looked at the egg and saw that there was damage to it, and I thought, oh, somehow it got damaged, and oh, poor thing. So then when I started opening up the exclosure to reach for the egg, I saw movement in the egg, and it was actually alive and hatching. So that was a really fantastic moment, because it just was later than all of its siblings, and it just hatched later. And all the salvage and resalvage that these eggs went through, it was amazing that all four of them hatched. There's the hatch. There's 3 of the chicks. 2 were already running around outside the exclosure. 1 is still in the nest, being kind of, they're a little wobbly when they're first hatched for a few hours before they kind of get their beach legs. And it is that's actually, hatch is one of the funnest days on the beach, because those chicks are just absolutely adorable. They were banded on July 26th. Unfortunately, by then, only 3 of them still existed. Here's a short video of the chicks being released. You'll see them coming out from where the people are on the left-hand side and heading towards the right. And if my volume is turned up enough, you'll hear Dad peeping. You can see all 3 of them running. And that was Dad coming in to collect them and reassure them that everything was okay. And I mentioned Dad, but mom had already left. And that's just the way the way piping plovers work. Is the female does most of the work in creating the eggs. They share the duties of incubation, but then moms tend to leave much earlier and leave the rearing of the chicks to Dad. And unfortunately, this female left even sooner than typically. Late nest seasons, late season nests are always kind of at risk, because the females tend to leave early. And this female, who had already had a nest in New York and now had a second nest, we think she was extra eager to leave, to go back to her wintering ground. And so these chicks were left with just Dad when they were pretty young. They were only 7 to 10 days old. And unfortunately, not long after that, Dad left. And we don't know exactly why. We speculated about this unbanded bird. We don't know if he was just a bird in the Great Lakes population that somehow eluded banding, or if it came from the Atlantic population, which is a possibility, because his plumage was a lot lighter, and the Great Lakes population tends to be a little browner, a little darker. So if he had come up early as part of the Atlantic coast population, which arrives earlier than the Great Lakes population, it could be that, it was time for him to go. And with both both parents gone, unfortunately, all 4 chicks were predated. And we lost all of them, and they didn't make it. And we were all pretty sad about that, because we had all worked very, very hard to get these chicks to hatch and to get them brought up, and to lose them all was a very sad moment for everybody in the team. The better part of the team, a better part of the season was that the 4 chicks from nest 1 successfully fledged, and they were released at Sleeping Bear Dunes. And this bird, who is now named Jevy, was one of the chicks of Jerry and Eve. And he was sighted on the wintering ground, not surprisingly, on the Gulf Coast of Florida. And I got to meet him on Friday, or her. We don't know yet what gender it is. And this bird, and this is not my photograph, it's somebody else's photograph, but you can see that Great Lakes, captive rear chicks get full adult combination bands, because they never want to have to reband them. And what I thought was especially thoughtful of the banding crew in Michigan that did the captive reared banding was that they used the blue and yellow combination on the right leg in honor of Jerry, his father, which was our pioneer for so many years. And I thought that was a lovely touch, and we really appreciated that. But I got to meet Jevy on Friday, and I should have inserted my crummy Digiscope picture of him, but I figured you can see him here, and you can tell for sure that he is the blue and yellow combination of Jerry's son. And the nest 3 chicks, which was the Jerry's grandson and Ollie's son, and Eve chicks, were released at Tawas Point State Park in Michigan on July 31st. And I was able to get a short video of their release, which is always nice to see. And there they are, coming out. Yay! So we didn't get to fledge them in the wild here at Presque Isle, not here at Presque Isle, there at Presque Isle, but we did place 8 chicks into the population via captive rearing, which is a lovely thing. At Gull Point, Ollie, Jerry's son, you can see him there on the left. He still has his chick bands on. He was never banded as an adult. He and his mom, Lola, had 2 chicks, and they successfully fledged and left Gull Point, left for the winter in August. Our season ended on August 16th. And after not seeing the chicks for 3 days, so those were only the two wild fledges we had this year at the park. In general, across the Great Lakes piping plover population, in the last 3 years, the total chicks fledged has grown very nicely. We've also had 80 pairs, which was a new record for the population. We produced 167 total chicks. 128 of them were in the wild, and 39 of them were in captive rearing. And if you compare that with 2022, which produced 160 chicks, total fledged chicks, but 150 of them were in the wild. So that meant there were only 10 captive reared chicks last year. But this year, the captive rearing team actually succeeded in fledging 39 chicks, and they must have worked very, very hard this season, and we appreciate their efforts because that was a phenomenal year. And I think it matched the record of the I think 2012 was a year that they had the same number of captive reared fledges. At Presque Isle, this is just our yearly summation. Our first year of nesting was 2017. We actually had 2 nests, but one of the nests got washed out and those eggs went to captive rearing. Only 2 of them survived and were successfully fledged. 2018 through 2020, we call our perfect years because we had 1 nest. We had 1 pair and we had 4 chicks, and all 4 of those chicks were successfully fledged. Those years were all Jerry and different mates. In 2021, we had 1 male and 3 females. Jerry kind of lost his mind and started nesting with every female on the beach, and no other males showed up to take females off his hands. So it was kind of a crazy year. Last year we did have 2 pairs, and we fledged a total of 5 birds, plus 4 of them. We lost 1 nest again, and it went to captive rearing. In 2023, we had 4 unique pairs, and that was a variation, 1 female, 2 different males. We had 2 wild fledged and 8 captive reared fledged, for a total of 37 fledges since 2017, which we're pretty proud of, that we've managed to put 37 new piping plovers into the population. We're hoping that some of those birds will actually repopulate places like Long Point, which is right across the lake in Ontario, which is one of the historic nesting sites, but has yet to see any piping plover activity. Our season results, once again, 7 adult plovers. We had 4 nests, 14 eggs were produced. Nest 2 fledged 2 wild chicks. Nest 1 and 3 produced 8 chicks, but they were all captive rear fledged. And our 4th nest, we lost all 4 of those chicks, and those four chicks were really special to us, and we were really sad about that. But in general, we put 10 chicks into the population, and that can be considered a success. But that's one of the reasons we call it bittersweet, because we sweetly put in 10 chicks to the population, but we also lost some very special birds this year. And speaking of special birds, this is my Jerry. I have known him since 2016. And since 2017, he has been responsible, and he participated in the creation of 44 eggs and the and 23 fledged chicks. He was 8 years old. 8 years old. I've known him for all of those 8 years, and he is a really special bird to me. He is, well, I like to say tattooed on my heart, and also tattooed on my left ankle with his bands and all. He will always be with me. And I would consider him the king of Gull Point. He was an incredible bird. He was feisty. He was one of the best dads ever. That a piping plover dad. He was very fiercely protective of his chicks, and always managed mostly to get those chicks to fledge. So he was very good. I'm really hoping his son Ollie, who is still with us and has nested at Gull Point for the past 2 years, carries some of those genes of protective dad. So far, he appears to be taking on that responsibility well. He stayed with his chicks for a long time this season. And in general, we always ask you to help us help them. No matter where you are, please keep your pets leashed on the beach. Honor all the area closures. You guys don't need to hear this because I'm sure you're all ethical birders. Pay attention to signage. And if you do see any Great Lakes banded plovers, there is plover at umn.edu, which would love to hear from you. And the they like the report. They also love photographs, so that they can see how the birds are doing. So, do what you can. I know sometimes it's very difficult to read the band. So sometimes if you take a picture of it, if you've got a good enough camera or you're good at digiscoping, they can also figure out the band combination and the numbers, perhaps, and um, and add a little bit of more tidbit to the database about the whereabouts of these birds. If you want to know more about Erie Bird Observatory, we have a website, either eriebirdobservatory.org or eriebirds.org. We're on Insta and X, and we're also on Facebook. We have a special banding Facebook page and the regular general Erie Bird Observatory page. And that's pretty much it. That probably won't work. It's a movie of our Jevy on Outback Key here at Fort DeSoto Park, but I think that's it's a link to a YouTube and it hasn't worked in the past. And I am trying to figure out how to stop sharing, but it's